I demand the right to exist in whatever form I like. And if you don't like it, I'll graffiti your fucking house.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
First of all, let me tell you that I'm really honored to be able to do this interview with you. We've met 3 weeks ago?
At Parliament Square.
Yeah, at Parliament Square.
Solidarity.
Yeah, during the protest that was not being actually there. We have not protested when we've been walking around because that was when the police has cracked down on the two demonstration, the trans rights collective.
Yeah, the Trans Rights Collective protest. Yeah. Apparently they were, the police threatened arrest, and on the second protest they threatened fines of up to £10,000. Obviously I didn't protest, and neither did you.
No, we absolutely didn't. We were, yeah. So as I said, I'm absolutely honored and a bit terrified of having this interview. I'm not really very experienced in doing this, but I would really love for more people, really like around the world, as many people as possible, to hear what you have to say, because you have a very particular experience as a trans person and a person who have spent 30 years in British prisons. So maybe what I would like to start is, because you've been incarcerated first when at the age of 19. So that was 1989, isn't that right?
1989.
Yeah. So who were you at the time? How have you identified yourself? Who was really this person that was locked up for, you didn't know it then, 30 years in the British prison system?
I always felt that I was a female trapped in a male body. Unfortunately, as I've said before on other podcasts and in other interviews, I didn't have a sophisticated enough language to explain, even to myself, the feelings that I had. I had no knowledge of the word transsexual or transgender. I didn't know anybody who was openly gay or trans. There was nobody like that around me. There was no role models. And I wasn't close enough to anybody to talk about these feelings and the issues that I had. I've just always felt I was a female trapped in a male body, and I spent all of my life trying to deal with that. Dysphoria can be quite complicated, and I have complex issues.
Have you thought, when you entered the prison, have you thought about hiding your identity? Have you thought about pretending to be a man?
Well, there were times when I did do that for my own self-preservation, but the gender dysphoria, and to me, I was full of so much self-hatred, so much self-loathing, and I was trying to control these emotions with self-harm. I knew I had to make my transition public, just to retain my own sanity and to be true to my own self. You know, this life that we're living today, it's not a rehearsal. You have to live it to the full, and to me, get as much as you can out of it, and don't cheat yourself. I mean, if you have these feelings, you have to acknowledge them. You have to work through them. You have to talk about them, because otherwise you will go insane.
So a lot of violence was directed at you in the prison. You were 19, and most of it was caused by the fact that you were openly transgender. Have you thought, or do you think that if you had at some point decided, after you were openly transgender, no, I'm saying I'm a male, that's it, have you considered that, and do you imagine that this might have impacted the amount of the violence that was being thrown at you?
The prison system in Britain has always been violence. I don't understand why, but as a nation, our governments and the people, we have a history of being quite violent, even towards our own people. Not just in terms of discrimination, but also in terms of this island mentality that we have, that we feel we want to control the world, or we still control big parts of it. As a nation, I believe that we're quite arrogant. I don't believe that as a nation we openly acknowledge that we actually need people from other nations to come here and to help to help create growth within our own economy. Yet when people do come here, they just get slated to try and do good things. And likewise in the prison system, I tried to be a positive role model for trans people, but people would just attack me, and no one would protect me except myself. Nobody cared about my human rights. People continually, like our famous writer J.K. Rowling, so many people just wanted to deny me the right to exist as a not just as a trans woman, but as a free person, to make my own choices, to live the life I want to lead, and to wear the clothes that I choose to wear. As long as nothing I'm doing is offensive to another person, I feel that everyone should be allowed to live their life to the fullest.
Your initial sentence was 7 years, and this has ultimately been changed to the life sentence. And this sentence you received for attempting to kill one of the inmates that have raped you. How long was that after you got to the prison?
Within 1 week.
Okay. So how come you have received the life sentence for what is basically acting in a self-defense and has not resulted in the murder? That was an attempt to murder.
Igor, the issue surrounding what led up to the crime, the crime towards me, but also the crime that I was sentenced for, it wouldn't be right for me to discuss that, because, as you know, I'm on parole for the rest of my life, and I'm not really at liberty to discuss that for legal reasons, you understand, because there would be consequences against me if I should speak about it publicly. All I can say is I served a lot of time for a crime of which I pleaded guilty to, and I'm not really at liberty to say more than that.
I'm saying about the next sentence,
Yeah.
sentence
Yeah.
after
Yeah, the life
after
sentence.
the attempt
Yeah.
life sentence, because that was
Yeah.
not related to the initial crime.
No, it wasn't related at all. But whether it was in self-defense or whatever, the actual charges and what led up to it, I'm sure that the Ministry of Justice wouldn't be happy with me speaking about that, because it's because there are still victims. So even not so much my direct victim, but it's just really complicated to understand. I don't know what I should say and what I shouldn't say. This is just all part of my license conditions to getting my parole.
Okay. So watching the interviews, the other interviews that you gave, I had this experience that this changing of the sentence and what has happened, that you have actually attacked someone with an attempt to kill, have allowed you to step out of the victim role. So that has had some impact. So to what extent that you have at this moment when you have attacked the other inmate with the intent of killing him, or to what extent the fact that suddenly you received a life sentence, so you were not really looking at getting out of the prison, how these have impacted you, how you spend the rest of your sentence in prison?
I think there came a point in my life when I thought, you know, I would just fight back. I was encouraged to fight back. I was encouraged by prison officers who said, when people attack you, fight them back. But you know, when I do fight back, it always gave the prison an opportunity to punish me rather than that other person. That would be the most common experience.
How have this need to learn to use violence to make people scared of you have impacted you and your your psychic construction? How this, you had to embrace the violence?
Well, if you're in the British prison system, you know, and I was in all the maximum security prisons. As you know, I was in 29 prisons in 30 years, 29 male prisons. I think after a while you get conditioned to see violence as the norm. When I was in maximum security prisons, to me, we've seen people who'd been murdered, I mean, in the jails, or suffer from severe, really bad attacks. But after a while, your brain acclimatizes to that, and you start to see violence as just a tool, a method of self-defense, a method of controlling your environment, and as a method of deterring any threats of people. If they think you're violent, they're less likely to attack you. If they think you'll fight back. And I think you condition yourself to that. And thankfully, there was still that part, that humane part of me, which tried to learn tolerance of other people, and also forgiveness, even to some people who've done really horrendous stuff towards me.
There's actually something that is really amazing, because in all of the time that I've met you, in all of the interactions, I have never felt threatened in any way. I have never perceived you as a person that is aggressive, that a person that I should be for some reason afraid of. And you are a person that has, as far as I met you, no problem with speaking about your emotions and showing your vulnerability. How do you think you will manage to keep that after 30 years in this like absolute toxic masculinity environment that basically tells you first to hide all of your vulnerabilities, to keep inside all of your emotions and so on? How did you manage to remain, to keep that humanity?
Well, Igor, I think that on paper, I look like a terrible person. There is no doubt I've left a trail of destruction behind me in my life, and I publicly acknowledge that. People can say what they want about me. They can call me evil, they can call me dangerous, they can call me what they want. But nothing I ever did to another human being was for nothing. Now, I'm not saying that to justify criminal behaviour, but what I'm saying is that, especially within the prison system, if people are coming to hurt you, if they're coming to stab you, if they're coming to throw hot water and sugar, which is mixed up so it burns into your skin, if people are coming with a knife for you in the prison system, you better learn to run really fast, or you better learn to stand your ground. Now, I would stand my ground because I wasn't a fast runner. and I learned to defend myself, even if it was just to wrap my arms around my head and to protect myself from an attack. Many of the attacks I underwent in the prison system wasn't one person. It would be like 20. You'd get like 10 prisoners kicking you to death on a landing, and you're on your own. But I could see that a lot of these people who attacked me, maybe they had their own issues with gender that maybe they needed to deal with, because it was just a minority of prisoners. Most prisoners were too busy getting on with their own sentence to care about why I was in.
It's actually, you said about the problem with gender that other inmates have. Actually, I've read, you wrote a piece for Vice about the sex in prison, and you've said in many other interviews several times that yes, sex is a very important part of life in prison, which is actually interesting because the prison, as it is constructed, you don't have a co-educative prisons. You have this space that's divided strictly with the gender. So I think that in the idea of a prison, there is included the idea of depriving a person that is incarcerated of normative sexuality. So in this situation, how this intended goal of depraving the sexuality from prisoners is impacted by the situation when suddenly you put a trans person, so a trans woman in a male prison, or a trans man in female prison. So how do you think this actually changes the dynamic of what's going on in the prison and how the prison is intended to be governed in terms of this depraving of sexuality?
I'm not sure whether it's just a particularly British trait, but British, they generally have two things they don't like to talk about. One is sex, and the other is money. So, I mean, I'm comfortable talking about money, I'm comfortable talking about sex. I'm uncomfortable about talking about money, but don't worry, I'll tell you how much you've got to give me later. But I'm not uncomfortable with talking about sex. I love it. Sex is my second favourite subject after graffiti. And I love sex, I just do. But I like the healing aspect of it, you know, the therapy of it. Most of the things that I do, whether it's political art, whether it's activism on Extinction, rebellion, resistance camps, whether it's my graffiti or whether it is having sex. I mean, I try to put therapy into that. I try to make it a therapeutic experience, both for me and the people that I'm doing activism with, the person that I'm making love with, or the person that I'm having sex with for money, because I'm a sex worker, as you know. So whether I'm having sex with men, women, trans men, trans women, non-binary people, I mean, it's important. And within the prison system, you bond with people. It doesn't matter whether you're trans or whether you're in a male prison or a female prison. People, humans, they bond together and they need to heal each other. And sex is just one way of doing that. And it occurs. We have this, in Britain, we have this history, especially of homosexuality. I mean, London has always been known as being quite a queer city. So, I mean, tolerant of people of different sexualities and different genders. Maybe that doesn't reflect the rest of the country as a whole, where, especially since the Brexit vote, there'd been a spike in attacks on LGBTQIA people. But London, on the whole, is still considered as queer as anything, and that is exactly as I like it.
Yeah,
But so is prison.
Yeah.
Prison has always been queer. It has. You've always had homosexual liaisons. This is before there was people were openly trans within the prison system. Homosexuality has always been rife because if you're sharing a cell with somebody for perhaps 2 years and you're living with them, the toilet, you see them when they're on the toilet. Do you know what I mean? You go to shower together for protection, and in the end, you create these bonds, and that transforms many times into sometimes love affairs, and it's a beautiful thing. And you can't, when Cupid strikes their arrow, do you know what I mean? It doesn't matter whether you're in prison or outside prison, you're gonna fall for each other, and you know, there's always been sexual activity. It's always going to happen. I don't think the deprivation of sex was a goal of the prison system, of the justice system. It just so happens to be a consequence. So for the Ministry of Justice, they may stop you from having sex with your partner. Do you know what I mean? But it's not done. That's not part of the reason to be sent to prison. It's just a side effect of that incarceration. Just as you can't go down the shops and get yourself a burger from a takeaway. Do you know what I mean? There's no law to say you can't go and get a burger. But the fact that you're behind prison walls means that you can't.
Prison. You said it in one of the interviews that prison is considered public space. Yeah. So as a public space, the sex in the prison as a public space
it's actually illegal. Yeah, it is illegal. Yeah. But that's pretty much after time that's the fun of it. So I mean, because with the prison officers, I mean, they don't know how to confront you. Like I say, if I'm in a prison cell when I'm perhaps with like 6 or 7 other prisoners and we're all having sex together, right? So I'm not saying we were having drug-fueled orgies, or maybe we were, but you know, do your thing. I was already in jail doing life. I mean, a lot of the lovers and a lot of the partners I had were also serving life sentences, and we didn't really care. We do what we want. We had to build a life for ourselves within the prison system, within this hotbed of toxic masculinity, as you said. But you still got to try and make a life. If you're doing a life sentence, you don't know if you will ever be released. You know, and when you're put together with often hundreds of other people in the same position as yourself, whether they're gay, trans, bi, or whatever they are, you know, you've got to build a life for yourself, and that's also a sexual life, you know, and whether it's classed as a public space or not, the fact is, there's no law to say that I can't have sex. It just says I can't have sex in front of anyone else. So I mean, all the sexual activity I've had in prison was always consensual. Obviously, a lot of the relationships I got into with other prisoners, some of them became rocky. There's lots of jealousy issues. But you know, I had to live a life. I had to build a life for myself in prison, just in case I was never to be released.
On actually making a life in prison, because the part of making your life in prison was your transition. And you have been denied a hormone treatment while you were in prison based on what is basically a catch-22 case. Where could you please describe the legal procedure for that?
Well, the stages. If you're a serving prisoner and you want to publicly identify as the person that you believe yourself to be, a trans woman, there are things that you have to do. You have obligations. One is you have a prison identification card. You have to get the name on that changed to your female to your or to your pronoun. I mean, because you could be a trans man in a female prison. You get all your legal name changed. Then you would go to your doctor, who would refer you to a gender specialist or a gender specialist clinic. For most people that I know, we go to the Charing Cross Gender Identity Clinic in Fulham in West London. And they have an extensive waiting list. But to get to your first appointment, it could take 2 years. And by the time you get there, they're not interested in giving you treatment or deciding whether you have gender dysphoria or not. They're just fact-finding. They want to know about your sexual history, your family history, whether anyone else in your family has any gender identity issues, whether they have them or whether they have had them. But they say you have to live, enroll as I'm going to do this, as a stereotypical male or a stereotypical female, whether you're a trans man or a trans woman. And you have to present yourself to the clinic in a certain way. You have to show them for at least a minimum of 2 years you can function in society, living in your identity that you feel most reflects who you are. But you have to do that for a minimum of 2 years. You have to show that every bill that you receive from the water company, the gas company, that everything is in a female name. You have to show the clinic that you are serious about this transition. But a lot of these things you can't do when you're in prison. A lot of prisons will deny you your clothing, access to makeup, and the prison doesn't help trans people. It's not set up to care. The prison system is set up to break the human spirit. It's not set up to help people who are vulnerable and need a bit of help or need protection. That's not what our prison system is for.
You have basically at some point taken the matters in your own hands because of being deprived under hormonal therapy. You have decided to do something.
Yeah, I decided to remove my own testicles, my own double orchidectomy operation.
So, first question, because I've checked.
You can ask me anything.
I've checked the information. It's incredible because the side effects of orchidectomy is basically the same as you would have the hormonal therapy, most of it. But there's also the side effects possible, like loss of sex interest. Were you aware at the time of these risks? Apart from, of course, risk of death and terrible pain.
I mean, obviously, performing the operation on myself, I mean, there was complications. Some of the effects, especially the side effects, some of which you mentioned, was not something that I considered. I was so desperate to stop my body producing testosterone, that hormone which felt like such an enemy to me throughout my life. Now, once I performed that operation upon myself, the gender clinic was legally obliged to give me hormone treatment, because otherwise, because of the lack of testosterone in my body, my bones would have just eaten away with osteoporosis. My bones would get too brittle and would just be really weak and snap. So my body doesn't produce no testosterone. I'm just filled with estrogen. But the lack of sex drive, I mean, obviously, if you do this operation on yourself, and I did the best that I could with what I had. I researched how to do the operation. But you know, I had no sexual desire for it about 2 years. But I fell in love all the time. You know, I fell in love all the time. I'll tell you, it was like within 3 days of removing my testicles, it was like the world had moved, it had shifted on its axis, you know, on its axis, you know. It was like it had shifted a few degrees. The world looked different. It smelled different. Food tasted different. The way that I related to other human beings, it shifted. I became more empathetic. Things I didn't care about, I really took a deep interest in. I took a deep interest in my environment. I took an interest in the food that I eat, where it comes from, how it's produced. And of course, I took a deep interest in the world around me, the prison system, and especially the conditions that trans women sometimes had to live under. As I said before, I liked sex. I liked sex before my operation. But after it too, I love it even more, because I just have this, it's like a connection on a deeper level than I had before. Beforehand, I was quite shallow. I was quite superficial in my relationships. Now I try to see the experiences that I have with someone else, whether it's sexual or otherwise. I try to see it through their eyes. I mean, I want to see what they see. Obviously, if I can see what they see, it also helps me to work on myself. So I mean, but you know, I need that human connection. I mean, I need the human. I need other people. I'm a social creature. I always have been. And obviously, you don't get any closer. I don't believe you can get any closer to another human being than if you either share a cell for 2 years. If you have sex with them, so I mean, but connect to them on a deeper level, not superficial level. I think them relationships, whether you're polyamorous or pansexual as I am, to me, I'm not interested in gender. To me, I'm not interested in their sexuality. I'm interested in having an experience with as many different people, so I learn as much as I can. Do you know? I think that's a beautiful thing, and I think it's a healthy thing. But like I say, it feels like the world had changed. I mean, it was like I'd been reborn almost. You know, it's like a spiritual experience. It wasn't all positive, because I still go through symptoms of like a woman would go through when she's experiencing a menopause. It's really weird how much males and females, the capability that we do have to actually see the world through another gender, a person's view of another gender. Do you know what I mean? And I think I've always believed that I was a female trapped in a male's body. You know what I mean? I was only going to get more empathetic with more estrogen, and that's kind of brought that. It's a really beautiful thing. Sorry for talking so much.
No. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Did any of these legal procedures regarding the transition of prisoners have changed since then?
No, they haven't. This everything that takes place in our prison system is political. Every decision that a prison will make, or the governor will make, or prison officers will make, it will be risk assessed. It will probably be a panel of specialists who will debate on whether you are transgender or not, whether you should be aided in your transition or not. And there's not normally a gender specialist on this panel who decide how you should be treated, what jail you should go to. Everything's political. If luckily for me, I stood on my own 2 feet. I didn't ask the prison system for much. I didn't ask to go to a female prison. Well, to be fair, I did do at one time, and I was taken to a female prison for 1 day to see what it was like. But you know, I was shocked by the way that female prisoners are treated in female prisons. It's bad enough in male prisons, but men, from my experience, if they are treated badly, they will make a noise about it. They'll kick up a stink about it. They will challenge the system about it. But from my experience, only of the one day, but I spoke to a lot of females in this certain female prison down by Sutton, and a lot of the women appear to be stereotypically passive. That when they were denied rights by the prison staff, when they weren't provided with facilities to educate themselves or workshops to learn a trade, they generally didn't fight and challenge the system as a male would in a male prison. And I think in female prisons, I think there's been a slow degradation. I think that's the word. I don't think the upkeep of prisons, the way that they're maintained, I don't think that's done very well in the female estate. I don't think there's much of a spotlight on the female estate of prisons as there are on the male prisons, because there are more male prisons. You know,
it's like kind of the patriarchy is ubiquitous, so also the discrepancy between how the male inmates in male prison are treated is also reflected in the prison system.
Well, I don't know if you're familiar with the term. It says the squeaky wheel gets the most oil, right? I mean, the squeaky cog gets the most grease. If you don't squeak, if you don't complain, you'll get nothing. And I think in the female prison estate, there hasn't been enough noise, there hasn't been enough activism within the prison, there hasn't been enough concerted resistance against the lack of investment within the prison estate. I don't think there's been much activism which spotlights that, which obviously allows the Ministry of Justice and ultimately the government to be able to escape their obligations to some of the most vulnerable and some of the weakest members of our society who have found their way into the prison system as a whole, but specifically the female estate, where many are mothers, many have drug addiction issues. I should imagine that as in the whole prison system, prisoners with mental health issues are not being taken care of. They're being contained. They're being held like cattle in prisons, where normally they should be in a hospital. They should be receiving professional treatment, not being maintained with the lowest, cheapest medication, and just being allowed to rot within the prison system with no help, no support, and definitely no love or care from the system as a whole.
Maybe changing the topic, because you have educated yourself quite extensively while you were in prison. You said in the other interviews that you've learned everything from reading and writing through gaining multiple degrees.
I don't have a degree.
Oh, yeah.
But what I do have is, once I learnt to read and write, I mean, there was no stopping me. There's no stopping me. Anyway, other prisoners used to pay me to do their TMAs, you know, that tutor marks assignments for Open University. So I would do people's essays for them. And by doing the essays, I would learn everything they learned, because then I had to teach it to them, you know. It wasn't like you, Igor, would come up to me and say, Sarah, look, I'm doing a life sentence, but I'm doing this degree in criminology, or I'm doing this degree in economics, or I'm doing this in social sciences, and I want you to do the whole degree for me. I want you to do all the work. And I would say, no, I'll do the work, but I will sit down with you and I will teach it to you. Once it's done, I will teach it to you. So if you're asked questions about it, at least you know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
So I mean, but it wasn't like cheating, helping people to cheat. So I mean, I was teaching them different skills, different ways of learning, which is the way that I learned to read and write. You know.
So while you were at prison, you published two books. One of them is Guide to Live Imprisonment Unofficial Guide, and the other one is Transgender Behind Prison Walls. Is the second book more written for the people, for transgender people in prison, or just for general public to know about the transgender people in prison?
Well, there's a similarity between the two books. There was a prison writer called Mark Leach who brought out a book called The Prisoner's Handbook. Now that Prisoner's Handbook, it gives general information about the prisons in Great Britain, the prisons in Northern Ireland, the prison on the Isle of Man. But there was nothing about practical day-to-day advice about how to survive the prison system if you was a life sentence prisoner or if you was transgender. I realised there was a need for these two books. So the first book, Life Imprisonment, an Unofficial Guide, it was written to give practical information to a prisoner. So if a prisoner needed to know the answer to a specific question regarding their sentence or regarding the way that their sentence is planned by the Ministry of Justice, so they know what to expect at certain levels, in certain intervals during a sentence. There are certain criteria you need to meet to get parole, for example. Before you can get parole, you have to show that you can be safely managed. For the prison system to assess that, you have to do offending behaviour work. But if you're not aware of these courses, you don't know how to do them. So you don't know how to access them. This is what this book was about, practical information. And then I realised that there was also a lack of information accessible, not just to the prisoner, but also to their families, to prison staff, to professionals who work with lifers specifically, or for the transgender community. So I wrote the first book with the intent of doing a second straight after, which is what I did. So thank you to Waterside Press for publishing these books for me. I could not organise I couldn't organise self-publishing a book while I was in prison. I needed outside help, and Brian Gibson at Waterside Press, he gave me the opportunity to share the knowledge that I had about being a life sentence prisoner or being trans, the practical issues, the emotional issues that, especially in the second book, issues that your family will go through, especially ways of managing, especially your emotions if your story hits the press. Every story that comes out about transgender prisoners is a bad reflection, both on the prison system and the specific prisoner that has been targeted, and also on society, because the press and the media don't pick up on positive trans prisoner stories. It just focuses on the cases which publicly show trans prisoners in a bad light. You know, not all prisoners are perfect. Prisoners, I mean, most of the prison system, most of the people in the prison system are not in for violence. They could be released. They're normally there because the capitalist system that we live within, it doesn't accommodate for some people, especially those who have special needs, which is why in Britain, why we treat our homeless and why we treat the people with drug addiction issues and the people with mental health issues, we treat them so shamelessly within Britain. If they're not paying taxes, if they're not voting, the government don't care about them, unfortunately. But these books, if I may,
Yeah, of course.
take these off. Yeah, Transgender Behind Prison Walls. This was written by me in about 3 months in prison, and it does, just apart from to Igor, with love and solidarity.
Thank you.
Right. Can I read what it says on the back?
Yeah.
Right, on the back it says, after explaining what is transgender, this first book on transgender in a prison setting looks at the entire HM prison service regime for such people, ranging from hard information about rules and regulations, the transition process, and how to access it, to practical suggestions about clothing, wigs and hair pieces, makeup and coming out, not just within the prison system, but also to your own family. The book also deals with such matters as changing your name, gender identity clinics, hormones, medication, and use of prison showers and toilets. That causes a big issue in the prison system. Where does a trans woman, if she's in, say, the education department, where do they go to use the toilet if you're in a male prison and the toilet is for males? The prison system is trying to, or the prison system was, especially before COVID, they were starting to make little breakthroughs in making life a lot more easier for trans women. But I think because of COVID, a lot of human rights, especially within the prison system, have been rolled back. Prisons have become more secure, in so much as they're locking people up for even longer amounts of time. And I suspect that even when COVID is over, and when it is even when it's a distant memory, in the mindset of people, the Ministry of Justice and the prison system will still keep people banged up for this same length of time. There will be no ease on the amount of lockdown that they have to experience on a day-to-day basis. But coming back to the book, which is yours, thank you very much for buying it. You will make the publisher even richer than he is already. Love you, Brian. See, a lot of this information is really important, practically, because the way that a trans woman sees the world, to me, is unique. It is. It's a brave move to come out as being trans. It's one of the bravest moves. It's one of the bravest things that anyone can do, because you are painting a target on yourself. And if you make a transition later in life and you don't present too well, and you don't have a particularly female voice or anything close to it, life's going to be difficult. You're going to find it really difficult to access the job market. If you come from a working class background and you're stuck on a council estate, your experience of being trans is going to be pretty much mirrored by the experience that a trans woman would face in the prison system, where you suffer from discrimination, where you live in an area where there's deprivation. A lot of people are angry. A lot of people are looking to lash out, and trans women often become victims of these angry people. The same happens in the prison system. Unfortunately, in Britain, there's also a class system within the trans community and the LGBT community, which a lot of people may feel uncomfortable with talking about, but I'm not. The class structure in Britain, where we have the working class, the middle class, and the upper class, there are lots of trans people within the upper class, which still exists. Britain is steeped in tradition still. It's still structured with this class system. But there are lots of middle class people, middle class trans women, and middle class people within the LGBTQI community. And many of these are sheltered from the everyday violence, the discrimination, the lack of job opportunities, because maybe some of these went to university and they have a really good education. So when they go into the workplace, their qualifications will outshine their transness. People are more interested in their skills. But when you're working class and you rock up to a building site, or generally people won't even offer you an opportunity for a job, surely because of your being transgender. That's not freedom. So, I mean, everyone should have an equal opportunity. But, you know, there seems to be opportunities for middle-class trans people and working-class trans people. These people in the middle-class group, they need to reach down to the working-class people. They need to share more of their resources. They need to give us money so we can protest, so we can create actions against government policy. Ideally, we all need to work together. But if you live on a rough council estate in London, your life experience, everything about it, even the length of life that you will lead is going to be different to some trans woman who's an accountant who went to Oxford or Cambridge and has their own detached house in the middle of Hertfordshire. Their experience is going to be different. And although we both share the characteristic of being transgender, that's pretty much where the relationship ends. We need to work together. But there seems to be a reluctance of some people, some middle-class trans people to do so, especially celebrity trans women, who, it would appear to me, if I'm wrong, I'll take it on the chin, but you do have the celebrity trans people, the kind of Paris Lees or the India Willoughbys, who present well, normally because they've had access to funding. They've had access to thousands of pounds, often tens of thousands of pounds, to be face-shaped, often sometimes to have the operation done on their throat. So they talk in a higher pitch. If you don't have access to this, it doesn't make you any less transgender. It doesn't make you any less a woman. What it means is you don't present too well because you are poor. You know? Now, COVID is a really bad thing. But worse than COVID and kills many more people than COVID is poverty. And poverty within the LGBTQI community, sorry for that, is prevalent. I mean, poverty is a big issue. Makeup for trans women is expensive. I mean, makeup is expensive, even in the prison system, which is why I set up the Transprisoner Alliance, to help prisoners who can't afford the makeup to be able to present well to the gender clinic.
Yeah, and you said about yourself on many occasions that you are intersectional activists. So that's what we've talked about this cross lines of the discrimination. You've also said on the several occasions that you also protest for sex workers' rights. And sex workers' rights, I would like to go a bit into this topic. This is a quite delicate topic, even within the political left. People have a very sensitive attitude to it and react quite drastically. Do you believe that sex work should be considered and criticized the same way as any other job within the capitalist system?
People can say what they want. Sex work is work. And let me tell you something, Igor. I know lots of sex workers, males, females, So before trans men, trans women, non-binary. But you know, I know lots of sex workers who are the people you would least suspect, the people you live next door to, the young woman who's who's studying fine arts at university, the housewife who's got 6 children and she's on benefits and she can't, she maybe lacks enough skill to get a job which would pay enough to be able to feed her children adequately and to provide them with holidays and new clothes like anybody else. People trapped in poverty, and sex work has always been the experience of, or has always been an occupation of people who are pretty much unable to access the banking system and make it work for them, or to get a job which will pay enough for them to live a decent life, you know. But that attitude to sex work, where people will look down their nose at us and think that we're less of a human being than someone who's perhaps an accountant, or even somebody who stocks tins of beans in a local supermarket. Sex is often, and is in many cases, still a commodity. It's a bargaining chip in relationships, you know. Many countries still have arranged marriages, and where the marriage was seen as a contract. And obviously, it's an unwritten contract you have with your partner about the sex that you have with each other. Sex is a commodity that people like me, we choose to sell it. I mean, I'm not a victim. I mean, it's something that I choose to do. It is victimless if it's two people having a consensual sexual relationship, right? And money is being passed. To me, it's no different to if I met you, Igor, right, and you took me for a meal, and you took me to a club, and you spend money on me, do you know what I mean? And you make me feel really good about myself, and then we go home and we have sex, or we make love, or whatever. It's just a contract, but it's an unwritten contract. The fact that I could meet you in a bar, you could buy me something to eat, we could go dancing, we could go out and do some graffiti, and then we go home, we have sex, which could be good or bad, especially if we're drunk on vodka, right? But you know, you might at the end, before you leave, you might know I've got no money and give me £50. It's just a thing. It's just a thing. Sex is just a thing that we do. Sex is a thing that I like to share. I mean, and the fact that people, I mean, I don't do anything illegal. Do you mean? But you know, if you're a sex worker and there's 2 of you living together in a flat and you're both working from the same flat, you can be arrested for running a brothel.
So would you say that all of the problems that come, that are described when people are speaking about the sex work, are basically the same problem that you get with any other job or work that you do in the capitalism? It's just so as you said, someone might say, oh, you're not always might want to have a sex, but yeah, most of the time people don't really want to go to work and stock the bean cans in the supermarket.
It's just an alternative form of employment, one that many people choose. As I said on another podcast, the amount of women that I know, especially since lockdown due to this COVID virus, who may not be considered technically as sex workers, yet they'll have an OnlyFans page, you know, and whether that's on different media platforms, they'll have the OnlyFans page where they'll be selling erotic stories, naked pictures of themselves, whether in liaison with someone else or on their or pleasuring themselves. I mean, but they're still selling sex. That's what they're doing. The world's oldest profession. I mean, and as long as there's a balance of power between the person who wants sex and willing to pay for it, and the person who, like myself, who's offering the service, as long as there's respect and a clear understanding of the rules, do you know what I mean, and a balance of power, the sex can be great. I get some money. They have a great sexual experience. Hopefully, I will have a great sexual experience too. But that isn't always so. I mean, why should I enjoy my job more than somebody who sweeps a road? Do you know what I mean? We're just both workers. That is what we are. And sex workers, we believe that we should have some rights. You know, that we should have some rights. I mean, there are many sex workers who pay taxes, who have set themselves up as a company and pay taxes. I mean, but the public can say what it wants about sex workers. Do you know what I mean? They can say nasty things, but I'm telling you, they will go to the internet. Do you know what I mean? Most evenings. Do you know what I mean? And they will just download hardcore pornography. Well, someone has to make that. I mean, it has to be made. Yeah. So I mean, so I would say to people, say, okay, if you wanna look down your nose at sex workers like me who choose to have sex with people, not often strangers. I mean, I could meet a stranger and have sex with them in a pub and have dinner. Do you know what I mean? It's no different to me meeting someone in a pub and say, "Oh, come back to mine for a night, but could you give me 50 quid because I've got no money?" That's all it is. It's just people. I think people read too much into it, and then the hypocrites. Do you know what I mean? Who will look down their nose at people like me and my brothers and sisters and non-binary people who do sex work. They'll look down their nose at us, and then they'll scuttle away to look at hardcore pornography, and they don't consider that as they're getting pleasure from the work that sex workers do.
Going on that road. So basically, the problem is not really sex work itself, but it's to some extent magnifies some other problems. You said in the interview done by Sean Atwood that your decision to undergo a vaginoplasty currently would be influenced by the fact that it might negatively impact the number of customers because as a sex worker. So would you agree that plays into that is actually a transphobia and the sexual fetishization of trans people that is a problem, and to what extent this sexual fetishization is impacting trans people in everyday lives?
Well, when people want to get their freak on, I mean, they come to a trans woman like me. Now, my sex worker friends who are, I mean, they identify as female and they were assigned female identification at birth. So, I mean, it's we're just trying to make the system work for us so we can pay our bills. If you want to live in safety, you need to live in a place, in an area like this where I live. Kew Gardens, Richmond upon Thames. Don't care who knows where I live, you can always visit. Just bring some, perniki and pierogi, and some vodka. But you know, it's we're trying to live from what we've got. Do you know what I mean? And at the time, I still have a penis, and that is something that some men are attracted to. Some sex workers, they specialise in certain things. So whether it's people who want to be tied up, normally men or women that I know who are in jobs where they are expected to be powerful. they'll come to me and I allow them to be submissive. Do you know what I mean? And I think sometimes that within their job, all that, I think they're under so much stress to perform at a certain level that sometimes they just need to surrender and let that stuff go. So I mean, so whether they're into being tied up, I haven't got none of them here, but whether they're here to be caned or whether, do you know what I mean? Thank you very much. So see, or whether they need to, or whether they want to be caned, you know, it's as long as it's legal, and as long as you're happy, as long as you have a safe word. I mean, what safe word would you use, Igor?
I don't know. I haven't really considered.
Pierogi.
Pierogi, yeah.
That would it. But the thing is, you know, sex is great, and I would say to people, you know what? The amount of relationships, the amount of people in prison that I met who were serving life sentences because they've killed their partner over something that's happened within their sex life, whereas they may have. So you'll have a couple who perhaps have been married 15 years, and if they had sex once a month for 15 years, that's still a lot of sex, that is, or once a week if you're lucky, or 10 times a day. But the thing is, you got to make it work. You both got to work at it, and if you don't, one partner is not going to be happy. Do you know what I mean? And if they're not happy, they'll generally look elsewhere, and that's somewhere that's generally someone like me. Do you know what I mean? Because I enjoy what I do. You know what I mean? I enjoy what I do, and I think it's healthy, and I think people should speak about sex a lot more than they do. Not just about sex, but also especially emotionally, how men feel. The amount of men that I know who you would look at them and you would think they had a hard heart. You'd think they didn't care. You'd think they weren't sensitive, but they are. To me, the amount of men who commit suicide, the amount of men who self-harm, I don't know the statistics, but I believe that more men self-harm than women. Or non-binary people. And I think the reason for that is the fact that men are expected in our society, as in other societies, including Poland, the right, especially the rise of the right wing in Poland and the rise of the right wing in Britain against trying to roll back LGBTQI rights, where the government and the media seem to encourage the persecution of queer people. It's really quite a sickness that we're going through. But I think a lot of these, the right wing, it's not because they hate trans people or they hate anyone who's gay or lesbian or non-binary. I don't think they hate us. I think they're frightened of us. Do you mean they see us as a threat to their whole way of life. Do you know what I mean? And that's all it is. But you know, we're full of love. We're a community that cares about people. Do you know what I mean? But you know, it's I think society is just, especially the right wing, they are frightened of us. I don't think they hate us, they're frightened of us. And obviously that fright, that fear, it happens. It's a psychological thing. Do you know what I mean? That if you're afraid of something for too long, you'll learn to hate it. Do you know what I mean?
There's coming to the political situation, to the rise of the right wing, of the fascism in Poland, and like the blatant transphobia in UK, because there is actually coming from Poland, where basically all of the LGBTQ people are right now in a very dire situation. There is of course the trans non-binary people are getting probably the shorter, the more discrimination,
yeah.
yes, and also they get some of the, but here is the discrimination from within LGBT movement on occasion. But it was actually astonishing for me in getting in UK and living here and observing how different is the level of discrimination against the trans people compared to the rest of the LGBTQ people. When we met, no, the week after we met, when before the Trans Pride Plus demonstration in London, we were basically preparing to set up the transparents and so on, and that was like noon on Parliament Square, and a couple of people came to you and called you a pedophile and told you that you cannot publicly protest. That is something that I don't think would happen if that was a gay or lesbian person sitting there, because there is much less of accepting for the violence and outright in the public spaces attacking gay people, lesbians, or than it is for the trans people. And we see like the situation with J.K. Rowling, and like people like defending J.K. Rowling for her transphobic. Why do you think that there is this difference, especially in UK, between the level of the discrimination compared to all of the rest of the LGBT and trans people?
I think it's easy. I think it's easy and it's lazy misogyny. I think that's what it is, because generally the J.K. Rowling and thankfully, a few handfuls of trans exclusionary radical feminists. Aside from them, normally the outright aggression and violence will come from men. And I think that men are terrified of trans women. I think they're terrified of our strength. I think they're terrified of the fact that, unlike a woman that they could overpower, a woman that they were stronger than, when they come up to somebody like me and they say something, unlike a woman will run, I'm more likely to punch them in the face and knock them out in front of their friends and embarrass them and humiliate them. And I think they know there's always that potential. I mean, trans women are often like scorpions. We just want to live our life. But if you mess with us, we'll sting you. Do you know what I mean? And if you want to destroy us, you better come with fire, because we ain't going nowhere. We're going to be around. We've been around since day dot, and we're always going to be around. And the quicker the British public, and especially the right wing within Poland, and especially in countries, in African countries where being trans could have you executed, being gay could have you stoned to death. You know, these countries need to realise that we deserve the right to exist too. And I think that would make society healthier. They should embrace us, because we are you. We are your sisters, your mothers, your brothers, your cousins, your aunts. I mean, we're still your family, this big human family. And the quicker that we learn to embrace that, there are different models of how to live your life, different models of how families are constructed. I mean, once upon a time, if it wasn't a mum, dad, and 2.1 children and a chihuahua, if you deviated from that model, it was seen as being deviant. It was seen to be as subversive. But you know, it's not. We're just people. I mean, but we're not going anywhere. We, as a group, the LGBTQI community, we're growing at such an exponential rate. We will be everywhere. We will be in your workplace. We will be serving you food. And it's going to happen whether you like it or not. We're not going nowhere. But trans women, there are people within the LGBT community, and especially the trans community, who you should be afraid of. You should be. Because we're not messing around. We're not going to play this political game where we're expected to be on the back foot. We're expected to defend ourselves all the time from the extreme right or from writers like J.K. Rowling who want to take cheap shots at the trans community. This cannot continue in a country which wants to remain healthy politically. It can't exist. There are other organisations that I work with. As you said earlier, I'm an intersectional activist. Many of the allies of the Transprisoner Alliance, of which I founded, the Prisoner Solidarity Network, and a lot of other organisations, whether they be Marxists, whether they be anarchists. London is a hotbed of activism at the moment. And these are our allies. If I can't get the trans community to back me and to support me when I challenge government policy, I will go to my allies in all these other groups. You need to be afraid. You need to be afraid to attack us and think that we will not retaliate using the tools of the law. You need to know this. Whether you are in Poland, or whether you are in Uganda, or whether you're in China, or whether you are in Mississippi in the United States, and you are a member of the LGBTQIA community, whether you're an ally or whether you're a supporter, you need to know that you are not on your own. You need to know that there are people who will back you with any means necessary within the confines of the law of the country you're in. We have a history, the LGBTQI community, not just in Britain, but in countries throughout the world, of resistance, of activism, of non-violent direct action against our governments, whether it's stopping the stock exchange from working for 24 hours. We need to show our power. We need to show this government that we demand to share power, whether it is within government, whether it's within a political party, or whether it's on the streets, where when we are attacked, that we can mobilise as a unit and we can do direct action. Because at the moment, the police seems to have little interest in making the trans community and the LGBT community feel safe. Many of us don't feel safe to walk down the street. But if you won't make me feel safe, my brothers and my sisters and my non-binary friends, they will. We're ready to mobilise. This is a great time to be alive. This is a time of change. This is a time of revolution, even on a small scale. But there are people placed in London at the moment from different activist groups, and we are connecting with each other. We're starting to work together. We're starting to work together as a unit, whether they're Quakers, whether they're Jewish and Buddhist, Muslim, whether they're atheists, whether they're Marxists, whether they're communists, and whether they're anarchists. All I've done since my release from prison is make as many contacts as I can, to network as hard as I can, to get these people together. so we can work together as an army, a political army that you should be afraid of, because we are going to change this country for the better. The only way for that to happen is that for the rational people, the mothers, the fathers, the way they raise their children needs to change. You need to teach your children about respect, respecting choice. You need to teach your children about the meaning of freedom and obligation and social contract. Don't teach your children to despise someone because they're poor. Don't teach your children to be suspicious of that woman over there because she used to be a man and that means that they're weird. You need to teach your children that that trans woman over there who doesn't present too well, the only reason for that is they live in poverty. Poverty. I mean, poverty is the biggest disease. It's the biggest curse of the LGBTQI community. I mean, if you've got a job where you're earning 200 grand a year, you can go and buy your house, you can get a mortgage. Many of the trans women that I know, universal credit is not even enough to feed them, let alone buy makeup, to make them pass well. But we're not going anywhere. And we will mobilise. We will. We will form a political party. That will happen. I will make it happen. I will force it to happen. I am trying to bring together the greatest talent that I can from a lot of these organisations, the lawyers, the barristers. I'm trying to get them to help me form a party. Whether we get political power or not is not important to me. What is important is that Great Britain, Europe, and the rest of the world knows that there is going to be a change. Trans people are going to start to become more prominent within your society. We are going to be running your councils. We are going to be fixing your cars, as we already are. We're going to be building your houses, but we're going to do it openly. We're not going to hide behind in our houses and be afraid that people who support the right-wing agenda will attack us on a daily basis. That seems to be the experience of a lot of trans people that I know. And as you covered earlier, when you said, do sometimes you resort back to your male identity for safety? Many people that I know do. And I've done it myself. And I felt like a cheat and I hated myself. I felt like a traitor to my brothers and my sisters and my non-binary friends. But that soon changed. I demand the right to exist in whatever form I like. And if you don't like it, I'll graffiti your fucking house.